Hello and welcome to Fine is a Four-Letter Word. Today's guest is Constantin Morun. Welcome to the show.
Laurie, thank you so much. It's such a pleasure to be here.
I had to hit record because we were starting to talk before, just like in the green room there. And I was like, wait, we have to get this
Yeah.
recorded because this is already going into good conversation territory.
Absolutely. I mean, every conversation you and I had seems to go in that territory anyway. It could be a podcast every time.
Yes, I agree. Yeah, totally. All right, so let's jump in. I want to get back to what we were talking about, but first I want to ask you about the values and beliefs that you were raised with as you were growing up.
Yeah,
What were they and how did they affect you?
yeah. So I grew up in Eastern Europe, in Romania, during the communist time, and it was actually a time of deep scarcity and fear and pain for the population of Romania due to many reasons. So a lot of what I grew up with was a mindset of scarcity, meaning that, of course, when we talk about values, hard work, putting in the effort to get yourself above the waterline, so to speak, so you can breathe and you can move on, right? But there are also values around what one can be and cannot be, what one can share and cannot share, because of what another, let's say society in that case, would view you as, right? So, like, for example, as a man, you can cry, right? That's an easy one because that's common across the world.
Yeah.
But also, not being able to necessarily follow in your desires unless your desires seem to align with what people believe is a career path that will bring that financial freedom that everyone in Romania at the time was struggling with. So, meaning, engineering, medical school, or anything like that allows you to have a bit more freedom. So, for example, anything artsy, especially for a man, no, you couldn't have that. So I would say, like, for me, it was kind of twofold. It's like the values of family, love, compassion, all of those were strong. The values of working hard, strong. But then you also had these other values that were rooted in fear of, the times that I was born in the 83, right? So times of that era, but also like how my parents grew up and their parents and everyone else in the society.
Yeah. And then your parents immigrated to where? To Canada?
To Canada, yes.
And
In
how old were you
2000,
then?
I was 17.
Okay.
I was 17 at the time, yes.
And uh, did you see, I mean, obviously there must have been some culture shock.
I bet.
A bit.
I mean, keep in mind, Romania at the time was not diverse at all. So, while you might see the occasional person from a different continent of a different race than you, it was very, very rare, right? I mean, I traveled a bit through Europe with my parents in the last few years before moving, and we saw a bit more diversity. But, coming to Canada, that's what you expect, right? Like you not expect, but that's what you see. You see diversity, and that's what you see in the U.S. as well in most parts of it. And also, the shock was also in the language because I did not speak the language, and I had to learn the language in a school system I wasn't familiar with.
Yeah. So, okay. So you were still in school
Yes.
at 17. How many more years did you have to go?
So, like, at the time in Canada, so I did 2 years of high school in Romania, and then I was to do 2 more years in Canada. They actually put me, so I did grade 9 and 10, but they actually put me in grade 12 when I came here. And at the time, there were 13 grades for high school. So I did grade 12 and 13 before going on to university. And my math, like, for example, the level of math I came with took me well into my third year of university. And things like that. But other things, of course, geography and, history and things like that I haven't had a chance to learn. Language, that was a big part of what I had to ramp up on.
Yeah. So how did you learn the language?
That's
Like
a good
English
question.
is such a difficult, I mean, I've heard because I've had the, good fortune, I guess, of being native in English speaker, but English is such a weird language. And I've heard it's very difficult to learn.
Well, especially for someone coming from a Slavic
Yeah.
background, right? Because Romanian is a Slavic language, very similar to Spanish and Italian and French, like rooted in that, with genders for every subject, for example. It was difficult, but I was fortunate enough to be able to have an amazing ESL or English as a second language teacher in high school. And then because of the diversity aspect of the groups I was put in, there were some Romanian kids, but so were kids from, like, I think 10, 12 countries. So if you had to communicate, you had to communicate with them. And So that kind of forced me by being put in that position. I was young enough where I could still learn the
Yeah.
language fairly fast, right? The only thing, I guess, of course, you can tell I have an accent. I found out later on that once you get past 12, 13 years of age, is for certain cultures, once the vocal cords are formed, the accent never goes away, which
Interesting.
now I'm much more happier with than before, because before I thought there was a weakness. People like my accent, so now I'm thinking, okay, that's a beautiful strength.
Yes, is part of who you are. I guess it's part
Yes,
of accepting the uniqueness of you,
yes,
which
yes,
gets
hundred
easier
percent.
for us to do, I believe, as we get older, more mature. But in the beginning, it's not.
I know, right? As a kid, especially because you at least I felt like I was different, but not in a good way
Hmm.
than a lot of
Hmm.
people. And it felt like I wasn't being accepted by, let's call them the Canadians, meaning like people that have been in Canada or born in Canada, raised in Canada. And
Yeah.
to some degree, it was true. But I'm sure I know for a fact I had a big part to play in it because of my own insecurities. I was putting off this energy that wasn't allowing me to be included in those groups or be attracted into the groups or the groups to me.
Right. Yes. Okay. So went to college. Did you were those beliefs that you had to study something that would make you money? Did that follow you into college?
100%. Oh
Okay.
my, that's a beautiful question. I mean, yes, my parents are both engineers. Thought that engineering would be the best path forward, and I got accepted into many schools. I was a very good student, especially in high school, where I focused a lot on my studies. So I had a choice. In Canada, the way it worked back then is like you would apply, and you get accepted or not. And I had, I don't know, like 5, 6, 7 different acceptance letters, and in various studies, math, computer science, engineering. I think those were the only three I applied for at the time, even though later on I realized my passion was always human psychology, which is
Hmm.
something I've always studied on my own. But I got into engineering, and I went to the school. But after 2 years, I'm like, no, this is really not for me. And I made the pivot to math and computer science, which was closely related. Also, not necessarily my favorite, but it was still the favorite subject I grew up with,
Hmm.
mathematics. So that's why I kind of pivoted to it for my studies, and I got a degree in that.
And then what did you do with that degree? Like, because you said already, you've already hinted at that this is not your passion. You were good at it, but it wasn't your passion. And that's a point to make too, right? You could be good at something and it not be your passion.
Absolutely, 100%. I mean, I truly believe that we are born with certain gifts that we get to learn about throughout our life, and most of us don't spend time to actually look at what those gifts are.
Mm.
So let's say those are tied to your spirit, to your soul, whatever you believe in, to your uniqueness. And then there are strengths that we develop over the course of our life, either by choice or we may feel like there was no choice. Like, I had to go study engineering, which of course, in reality, I had a choice. I chose that. And those are the strengths that we develop. And of course, mine was rooted in that, but it was also enhancing some of my gifts. For example, one of my gifts is the ability to coach and mentor other people, to share what I've learned in such a way that's easy for someone to understand and be able to guide them to find their own answers. So that's why from a very young age, I've been a mentor and a coach, a tutor in math and other sciences, and the same in university. But I've also had my own businesses quite a bit. Actually, in fact, I had my first, we can call it a business, when I came to Canada when I was 17. Tied to e-gaming, tied to the online, because I guess the internet was becoming really big around 2000.
Hmm.
So I was running at the time it's called a forum, essentially. This is a website where people would go and have conversations, and
Right.
I was making money from it, and I was just having so much fun. And as it progressed, I did a lot of entrepreneurial adventures, but then of course the pressure of society, and I say society here as my parents and
Yes.
my mentors, but also everyone else is like, oh, you got to get a real job, because entrepreneurial adventures, especially ones that were outside of the norm, were kind of looked down upon. And I kept getting pulled back into, let's call it, a normal job. I mean, my first job in Canada was, I was just cleaning bathrooms and, vacuuming floors in an office building. That was like literally when I came to Canada, 17. Delivered pizza, worked in a factory, did all of those things. But then, once I got my degree, I was like, no, you got to get a job, a real job.
Yeah.
And I started as a web developer at first, which was not for me at all. Then after the job, I took a chance on myself against everyone else's recommendation. And
Mhm.
I played professional poker for a while and coached professionally for a long time. I was making a lot of money as a
Wow.
20 something year old, but then people couldn't see it as something sustainable, right? So like I eventually gave in to the idea. There were some external pressures as well in the poker environment, that all of it kind of culminated in me saying, you know what, I need to go get a real career. And that's what put me in corporate America. And I started at the bottom, so to speak, and then worked my way up really fast into leadership. And then over the last 7 years, coming over to a company as large as Microsoft in a very senior sales role. And all of that is because of everything I've done leading up to it.
Mhm.
And the choices I made, of course.
Yeah. Do you have any regrets about those choices?
Absolutely not. No, I mean that's a beautiful question. I used to have regrets. And then I realized, I mean, regret is just a way for us to ignore the gifts that come in every single lesson of life. And for me, if I regretted going down that path, that meant that I couldn't look beyond the fact that was actually for me and not against me, right? Because it's like if you regret, it's like, oh, this wasn't for me at all. So no, absolutely not.
Yeah, I think there was a book. Daniel Pink wrote a book about regret. What was that called? Um,
I'm not familiar with that one.
Let me look it up real quick.
Mhm.
Because he talks about that the power of regret, how looking backward moves us forward,
Exactly. Yes.
and he talks about that it regrets are not a bad thing. Like they how like it says in the title, it helps move you forward. It helps you understand what you don't want. It helps you see what changes you might want to make going forward, so that you can become the favorite version of yourself. I
Okay.
talked with an earlier I can't remember now if it was on my show or if I was the guest, but we were talking about creating the best version of yourself.
Yeah.
And the person I was talking to said, I'm not a big fan of the best version, but she had heard a phrase about becoming the favorite version of yourself, which I thought was an interesting
Yeah, I mean,
choice
it's all
of
perspective, right? I
phrase.
love like everything you said because it's all about perspective, right? Like, is
Yeah,
when you say, you can use regret to fuel where you want to go. Absolutely. I mean, is it called regret then, or is it called learning from your lessons, right? Is it called the
exactly.
growth mindset? Like, it's for me, it's like perspective is everything.
Yeah.
If I look back and say, okay, I'm regretting having done that, it has a different connotation than if I say I'm looking back and I say there's a gift there that's been unopened of something that maybe prickles me right now. I don't want to look at it
Hmm.
because that's what regret is. It's something that you're really holding shame and guilt and judgment over. And how can I release that so I can unpack that beautiful gift? It's almost like the wrapping paper to me over a gift is that guilt, the shame, the judgment, the regret. And then once you get past that layer, you can actually see the gift below it.
Yes. Oh, yes. I like that definition of regret, because yeah, it's something that happened. People who've been listening to my show know that I define life as an experiment and an
Yeah,
adventure, and there
exactly.
are no mistakes. It's a learning experience. And if you go down a path and find that that's not the right path for you, or that you choose to make a different choice now, it it's just an experiment. Okay, that didn't go the way I thought it was going to go, and now I can go in a different direction and see how that works out.
Yeah, that's beautiful. I mean, that kind of touches back to what you and I started our conversation with offline
Yeah.
before we jumped to record. And what comes up for me as you shared that a lot is this idea that challenges will show up in your life. And I used to be upset that like why is this challenge keep showing up for me? And what I've realized now more than ever is the challenges are an opportunity for you to learn to get the next version of yourself, the best version or the right version, whatever term you want to use.
Yeah.
And if you actually overcome a challenge, abundance is on the other side of it. Now, abundance is not just material, right? It's like abundance of peace of mind, of joy, of fulfillment, of relationship, of whatever is actually beneficial for you in the moment and what you want. But when you face a challenge and you don't overcome it, That's when the risk comes in of judgment, regret, shame, guilt, all of the beautiful stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And then you have a choice. It's like, well, can I learn from this so next time the challenge shows up, I can actually get a step closer to overcoming it? Because I believe truly that even if you don't fully overcome a challenge, and even that's a matter of perspective, you still get to enjoy some of the abundance that comes with the process.
Yes, yes. When we were talking before in our pre-show call, we were talking about the difference between a growth mindset and a fixed mindset.
Yes.
Yeah.
So we pretty much touched on this here as well in a way. But for me, if we look at how most of us are raised, now some societies do it better than others, but I very much had a bit of a mix of growth mindset and fixed mindset. Growth mindset meaning, being eager to study and work hard, and then knowing that you can learn more and you can become better. But fixed mindset because mistakes are being punished severely in the society I grew up in. But even if you think about North America, because once I moved, I still saw a lot of fixed mindset approaches where like how they would approach the studying in schools and how they reward people or not reward people based on how good they do. And fixed mindset to me is the mindset where you are looking at everything that's happening in your life as happening to you instead of happening for you. And a growth mindset is understanding that, again, challenges will show up in your life, but everything is for you. And if everything is for you, that means you can have a perspective to say, what am I missing here? If I feel that this is really a bad situation for me, and there's many terrible situations in life, there is always something in it for you.
Yes. Yes. You mentioned challenges a couple of times, and in my head, I'm thinking uh, that challenges are always going to show up. Like there's never a point in somebody's life where they get to that they don't have any challenges anymore.
Mhm.
I think a lot of people think, well, once I do this or once I get this, then my life will be smooth sailing from there on out. And that's not how it works.
I mean, but the illusion is strong. But when
Yes.
I love that you actually took it to that direction, because I want to talk about something that I've been toying with for the last little while, and it finally came into full fruition for me to really understand it. And I'm going to talk from two different perspectives here. The first perspective is the perspective of like what drives us in life, right? And we know that, we people talk about the mind, body, and soul as three things that are part of us and who we are, right? Now, all of us know that our mind is powerful, and a lot of the decisions we make, a lot of the things we do are based on what goes on up here, consciously or unconsciously. We know that from neuroscience, from psychology. We also know, at least we know, if we don't know it from ourselves, we know from others, that somehow there is this magical thing called intuition that can come through and it can guide you on a path that you didn't expect to have guidance on. You're like, man, you shouldn't take that left turn, you should try to take a right turn. And of course, often enough, we ignore that. And I've done that all my life up to a certain point.
Mm-hmm.
Once we start to pay attention a bit and realize, wait a second, there's some magic, that there's some wisdom in that, we start to come into our bodies a bit. So it's like we start to listen to our gut feeling, we start to listen to our heart. And once we start doing that, as we open up our heart, we open up the connection to the soul aspect, to the spirit, to whatever you want to call that. Even if you believe in God, the universe, or whatever you believe in, that's what you're opening up the door to. So all of a sudden, you start to be able to use the gamut of everything that happens. Everything you have access to, all those gifts we talked about before. Now, so this is how I see the world working. Now, personally, I saw myself as someone, or I was someone that used my head primarily, nothing else. And I wasn't doing a great job at using most of its abilities, because the subconscious mind is such a vast box of
Yeah.
shadow and light that it controls a big part of your life and you don't even know it, right? There's
Yeah, it's very
statistics that,
powerful.
right, like the statistics I looked at the other day when I was doing a masterclass, and the research behind it is like something like, they're still arguing about the actual number, but it's between 60 and 80,000 thoughts that we have every day.
Mm-hmm.
From those, there's like 90 to 95% are recurring thoughts,
Yes.
and from those 80% are negative,
Right.
for good reason, right? Because if you think about us as a as a human being that had to evolve over time, it
Right.
has been very unsafe for most of our life as a human on this planet. So all the negative stuff has to come to you first. Otherwise, you're going to die and you're not going to be able to continue
Right. Leave a
progressing. Right?
legacy.
But those that leave a legacy are the ones that put fear first and allow it to keep you safe. Because really, if you think about your mind, its only job is to keep you safe, nothing
Right.
else. It doesn't care how good you feel in the process, how much money you have, how many good relationships. None of the stuff matters, right? But
Hmm.
to your heart, a lot of that does, right? So that's why, what if you could harness the power of your mind and the power of your heart, soul, body, whatever you want to call it? And it's not the one or the other. It's what if you could have all of them?
Right.
And all of a sudden, doors open. So now that we have this the set stage, the stage set, I want to drop into something around the mind that blew me away when I realized this for myself and for quite a few of my clients. I look at life. I look at what happens with the stories of our life, which is what we've learned as young children and young adults, in 4 tiers. So the first tier are your symptoms. So let's say you have to go to work, right? You work a 9 to 5 job that you don't like. What's going to happen on Monday morning, or actually it's going to happen Sunday sometime when you
Hmm.
get ready for work? Anxiety is going to build up, some stress is going to build up, some overwhelm may come over you because you're like, man, I have to prep some food, and then I have to take the kids to daycare, and then I have to do this and this and this, and all of a sudden, like, your mind just takes over and
Right.
you have a miserable night, and then you maybe can't sleep, you have to wake up early, you're miserable, and the routine happens. Many of
Yeah.
you in the audience right now probably can relate to that. I've been there so many times myself. Now, what's stress? What's anxiety? What's even depression? What's, overwhelm, hesitation? Those are, I call them symptoms of something else, right? Because they don't just appear on by themselves. There's something that's causing them to appear in your life.
Right. And they're future focused.
And past, yes, future focused, but inspired by your past, right? Because they're always
Right.
based on what happened in the past. Because you
Right.
don't know what you don't know. So then your brain is going to be like, okay, well, this is what happened. And it's important to know that they have found that your brain cannot tell the difference between, or your conscious mind, between what's real and what's not.
Right.
So you
Right.
can make up these stories, or someone may have told you, let's say, you are my spouse and you told me a story and I believed you. Then all of a sudden, that's part of my reality, even though it's
Yeah.
fake, right? I mean, we know all about fake news these days, but
Right. Right.
it's true. And so the tier 0, as I said, at the very top is a surface level stuff,
Yeah.
the symptoms, right? And people usually what? They medicate the symptoms. And then
Right.
they hope that the root cause somehow goes away.
Right.
I was the same, by the way, Lori. So it's like, that doesn't compute anymore. So what's below the surface then? I will go 2 levels lower and then I'll come back to the level in between. Tier 2, so we have tier 0 as a symptoms. Tier 1 will come back to. Tier 2 is what I call the core fears of humans. And you'll see this in psychology books everywhere, right? Like fear of death, fear
Yeah.
of mutilation, fear of failure, fear of success, fear of abandonment, fear of rejection. There's a bunch of them. Because if you think about it, if I say, I'm getting stressed over my job tomorrow and I don't like the job to begin with, what type of fears could be driving that? Well, it could be fear of abandonment. It could be, and I'll explain how in a second, it could be fear of failure, that if you fail at the job, then you failed as a human being.
Right.
You're not enough. You can't provide for your family. You don't have enough. If you fail at the job, you're going to be abandoned by your boss, by your team, but
Right.
also by people in your life, because now you're seen less than, because you can't provide for your family.
Right.
So there's all these fears that run our life. Now, why do I feel like there's another tier in between those big fears and the symptoms? Because a fear, if you look at any fears in your life, they are illusions. Because you have proof for the fear to be true and you have proof for the fear to not be true. But once you're able to tackle a fear and say, oh, I see you for what you are, it has no more role in your life, because fear has a role of keeping you safe and in the same spot.
Mm-hmm.
But if it's an illusion and you see the illusion, how can it have any hold over you? How can it have any power? And our ego, our mind, very smart, wants to keep us in the same spot, creates what I call decoy fears. So it sends these fears in front of the main fear. So it's harder for you to get to the root cause, because again, once you get there, you gain the power back.
Yeah.
I'll give you an example from my life. An
Yeah.
opportunity. Sorry, go ahead, Lori. Yeah.
I was gonna say, I don't know if this is where you were going with the example, But we had talked about 2022 and what happened
Yes.
in that time in your life, because obviously the show is called Fine is a 4-letter word, and things were not fine.
Oh, they were not fun at all. No, absolutely. Exactly. That's what I was
Is
going to
that
go
where
to,
you're going? Okay.
because you can say that's yes. And I'll explain why. Because, and what this started for us is to get to the tier 3, which is the one that just, my mind just, not in my mind, it appeared in my field. I finally understood it as something that almost no one that I know of looks at, and me included. And so we'll fast track to the lower bottom. It's this idea of not being enough,
Mm.
not being enough, not doing enough, not having enough, the enoughness problem. Because if you look at every single fear, it's rooted in enoughness. Fear of abandonment. If I'm not enough, then I'm going to be abandoned by my peers, by my tribe, by my parents, whoever. Fear of rejection. If I am not enough, as I am, I'm going to be rejected by this group and this other group. Fear of failure. If I don't do enough, I'm not good enough. I don't have enough, right? So you can see everything is actually stemming from enoughness.
Yeah.
And that's, to your point, coming back to like what I was in 2021. Because you mentioned as well, is this illusion of chasing something and thinking that that's going to make you enough.
Mm-hmm.
That's going to give you enough. That's going to allow you to do enough. That's what I was doing. I was chasing this big promotion at Microsoft, which I got because I'm a high achiever, top performer. I did really well. I got a promotion. And I thought this was it. I got here. I'm going to feel better. I'm going to be happier. I'm going to have joy. Guess what? I didn't.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, I had more material success than ever before. My life looked okay from the outside, but on the inside, I was a shell of myself because I'm like, there is no joy, there is no fulfillment. My depression was at its worst. So all those symptoms we talked about
Mm-hmm.
were at its worst because I actually haven't dealt with the root cause. I only stayed at the surface level. I stayed at the symptoms. And I thought that I can medicate the symptoms by chasing and achieving things, which
How were
ultimately doesn't.
you medicating it?
No, by just ignoring
Oh,
the
okay.
signs and not going deeper and just simply, like, I wasn't on any medication per se, but I would do therapy and I would just focus on my work. You know how people sometimes just become so infused with a project or so entrenched in a project that they ignore everything else that's going on in their life. And I was that person.
Mm-hmm.
And I would say, you know what? I know that if I get this next milestone, I will have the peace. I will have the joy. And
Right.
that's the illusion. That's why we even started the conversation there, because that's what
Yeah.
said you saw as well. And it's such a big thing that a lot of people don't realize that is controlling your life. This idea of like, you're not enough, so you're going to strive to find that enoughness outside of you as opposed to looking internally.
Yeah. And what were the tools then that you used or found and used to help you through that difficult time?
Like any high achiever listening here right now, you probably relate with the fact that you think you have to do it all alone. You think that you got yourself into this problem, you're going to figure it out. After all, I mean, you're someone that works really hard, so you can do it. And that was me, by the way. So what I did is, once I realized, obviously it took a second to let the dust settle.
Mm-hmm.
But once I realized that this was not it, this is, what everyone told me about the American dream was a lie for me. I had to figure out what's going on. Like, why am I chasing all these things? And then I have more material success than I've ever had before, because I grew up very poor. I was poor in Canada when we came here. And now I had financial freedom, you could say, where I could at least, I had a roof over my head. I could buy shiny toys. I could go on vacation. But I wasn't bringing any joy.
Mm-hmm.
So it's like finding that, it's like, why is it that we chase it externally? So I started reading books and watching podcasts and videos and stuff on these topics. Because before, he was focused on personal and professional development, but not external stuff, right? Like, use this framework, use this system, do these 10 hacks to do better. And I was really good at that. And then, of course, the biggest catalyst for me was taking 3 weeks off for myself to go to a country I've never been to and do something I've never done before, which is go to Ecuador and sit with a group of people I've never met and have a spiritual experience. That's how I can put it. And that opened me up significantly. And that put me on a path since then of going in further and further, going into my shadow, doing the work, bringing the light out, and just opening up doors. And the more I do this, the faster things unfold, the better it gets.
Mm. What led you to that trip to Ecuador?
You could say it was me listening to my intuition for once. It was a call inside of me. And I knew I had to do something. And I knew that getting away from my routine would allow me the time to just go inwards.
Mm-hmm.
And that's really because that's what I found in my discoveries. So the trip in Ecuador is in 2022 in April, which was about, I want to say 8-9 months after my promotion and when things, hit the fan, so to speak.
Mm-hmm.
And so, in my research, I have realized the importance of solitude and reflection and introspection. And that's really what led me to that.
Okay. Yeah. So you heard your intuition and heeded it.
Essentially, yeah. Not
Okay.
without fear. There was lots of fear, that's for sure.
Yeah. I can only imagine because you had never done anything like this.
Not even close, yeah.
Yeah. And that now you have have you gone back? You've continued on that path, right?
Well, I would say so. That was my spiritual awakening path. So that time, I also sat with the native plant medicine of the area, ayahuasca and San Pedro. I haven't been back to do those type of medicines because I haven't had a calling to do it. But that opened up a path of self-discovery and spiritual growth. And that path has been exponentially getting bigger and bigger the more I go down it, right? With having conversations with people like yourself, being on shows like this, having my own show, and also having my own mentors and coaches I've hired or partnered with to expand my horizons. And that includes a lot, of course, of introspection and self-time. I went from someone that spent literally zero time on myself other than, of course, escaping through gaming and Netflix and food and sex and all the stuff, to someone that's spending 20 plus hours a week now on things like meditation, introspection, journaling, spending time in nature by myself, okay, maybe with my dog sometimes, but doing those things and then being more productive than I've ever been in my life, working more hours than ever before, yet feeling more joy and more fulfillment than I've ever felt in my life because of all this work that's going on the inside.
Yeah. So to someone listening right now who is in that place that you were in 2021, what would be one small step that they could take this week to move themselves in a different direction?
That's such a great question, Lori. There's so many small steps I can think of, but I would say the biggest one that comes up for me is to give yourself grace. Understand that where you are right now doesn't define you as a person or how enough you are, and that you got yourself where you are right now, which means that if you did that, you can also get yourself to the next step. And that may start with like 15 minutes of just listening to an inspiring book or a podcast episode like this. It might mean 15 minutes of sitting, putting your distractions down, your phone, everything else, and just see what comes up as you sit down. What messages come through? Meaning, like, what's your mind trying to tell you? What thoughts come up?
Yeah.
Maybe doing meditation, like something small that allows you to stay with yourself, not externalizing anything that happens.
And that's going to be very uncomfortable at first, which is why most people won't do it, don't want to do it, because it feels so uncomfortable to sit with yourself.
And those are the decoy fears I was talking about, right?
Yeah.
Those are, and yeah, exactly. And they're illusions, because you can always ask yourself the question, is this true? When something comes up that tells you, I shouldn't be doing this, this is too hard, ask yourself, is it true? Because you have proof for both sides. Which proof do you want to look at?
Right. Oh, such a good conversation. Thank you so much. Before we wrap up,
yes,
you have a different hype song than many of my past guests. And I'd like you to share what the song that you listen to, or the type of music that you listen to when you need an extra boost of energy.
now, when I put a song in there a couple of weeks ago, Lori, that was what I thought would be the case, right? But since then, about a week or so ago, there's a new song that entered my field.
Okay.
That literally, like nothing I've ever felt before. That is something I listen to multiple times a day, which again, before I would listen to a playlist, not a specific song. Yeah. So I'd like to talk about that song, if I may.
Go ahead.
And I mean, I don't even know how to pronounce it. It's called Gajumaru by Yaima, Yaima.
Okay.
And it's a song about essentially walking through the valley of your own shadows to free yourself up from all stories that you've been told. And that was such a powerful song for me, and it still is, because it speaks to the power that we each hold. And how we are creators of our lives, and the only person that stands in our way to whatever we want to create is ourselves and nothing else. And when we can go in to our shadows as much as our beauty and do the work, as painful as it may sound, and I promise you, it's not that as painful as you think it is. I know idea from my own experience. Then it gets us through, right? And I mean, the song is so beautiful. I mean, I'll send it to you as well, so you can put it in the show notes. But
Yes.
yeah, that's the hype song for me now. Literally, I play it now every morning, whenever I feel any experience that I play it.
I'm eager to listen to it.
Yeah.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much. If someone wants to continue this conversation with you, where is the best place for them to find you?
You can find me across almost all social media networks under either Constantin Morun or my podcast, Unleash Thyself. So those are the best places to find me. Things I do these days a lot. I run master classes. These are usually free events or very low cost, like $10-$20, where I spend 3 to 4 hours with people and I walk through practices and what I have discovered on my journey and the type of work I do with my clients. And I host adventures in cool places like Costa Rica, right? The retreats, as some may call
Yes.
them, and all these beautiful things. So you'll be able to find all this information either on my LinkedIn, Constantin Morun, or Instagram, Facebook under Unleash Thyself.
Fantastic. I'll have links to all of that in the show notes as well.
Awesome. Thank you, Lori.
Constantine, thank you so much for joining me today on
Thank you so
Find
much.
as a Four-Letter Word.